Welcome to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method, and I'm also known as the Queen of Cold Calling. Today, our very special guest is Suzanne Paling, and she is the principal at Sales Management Services. Suzanne is a recognized leader in sales management. She's been doing this over 25 years, sales management consulting and coaching. She's helped more than 60 companies improve their sales performance and processes. Clients include product and service firms in the manufacturing, software, publishing, distribution, medical, and construction industries. Docurated selected her blog as one of their top 50 sales management blogs. And Suzanne is the author of 2 award-winning books, The Accidental Sales Manager and The Sales Leader's Problem Solver. She also co-hosts the podcast Sales Hiring Straight Talk. So welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I am excited to have you. And I want to hear the backstory. How did you get into sales management services? Because that is just so vitally important. So how did you get here?
It is. I had been a sales manager in corporate America for many years, and I had my first child. And I decided that I wanted to continue to work, but I didn't want to put in the long hours of showing up to the office. In those days, you actually had to go in. And I thought about starting my own business where I could work maybe 3/4 time. And that's how sales management services came to be. I started reaching out to some smaller sized companies, and luckily I was able to contract with a few clients, and that's how the business started.
Okay. So I was looking at your website, and I saw that you do a myriad of different things, but one of the things that caught my attention was recruitment and hiring, because I can't tell you how many business owners, sales managers I have talked to over the years that tell me they have somebody or even many somebodies on their team that they've had around for a really long time, and somehow these people aren't selling much of anything. Mm-hmm. And while certainly training can help, it seems to me that it probably starts right at the beginning with who you're hiring. So could you talk a little bit about how to hire a good salesperson? How do you know? What are the mistakes that businesses make when they're hiring?
Sure. You have to have a methodology, and you have to stick with it. And so what I do after we've looked at all the resumes and we agree who the initial candidates are going to be, I conduct a phone interview with those candidates. And I ask them a series of 8 questions that are sales or sales leadership based, depending on who I'm interviewing. And at that point, I take the data back to the client and I say, this is who I spoke with. This was the scores they got. And we agree who we're going to see next. Before we go any further, before we do anything else, we then assess those people with an online objective assessment to determine whether or not they really can sell. And they take the assessment and they do well or they don't. So at this point, there are 3 data points. There is the resume, there is the phone interview, and there is the assessment. My client hasn't even met the candidate yet. And the reason I do that is people tend to hire the people they like. So we all agree now with these 3 data points who we're going to bring in for the first in-person interview. I run the interview. I say to my client, I drive, you're in the passenger seat. And I ask them a series of questions about their career, their sales methodology, their assessment scores. We cover a wide variety of issues. And at the very end, I turn it over to my client and they get to ask a few questions. And then from there, we decide whether or not to bring them in for a second interview. And my client, at that point, I coach them on, they handle it more than I do. They conduct the majority of that interview, but I give them coaching on what to ask and what to say. And from there, if we still are interested in that person, we check references and then we make an offer. So what I find is people, number one, don't have a methodology. And number two, when they meet someone they like and they feel could really sell, the methodology goes right out the window. Oh, I know this person. I'm good. We don't have to waste money on assessment. I'd call their references, but I know they won't really say anything of value. We're good. Let's go. And then the disaster starts.
I actually interviewed someone once and I checked their references because you always think, who's going to give you bad references? But I called the references and one of them said to me, he'll be fine as long as you drug test him. So always check the references.
I have heard that again and again and again. People will say to me, oh, Suzanne, don't bother checking the references. I said, in all my career, I have never not learned something. Not always a deal breaker, but I have always learned something that I would not have learned through the interview process. And like you, I've been amazed at how candid people can be at times.
Absolutely. So when you're going through this process with clients, are you typically looking for people with experience? And is it the same if the client, if an organization is willing to hire a beginner?
Very few of my clients have been interested in a beginner, and I hire very few. Most everybody has some experience.
And I'm curious why that is.
I work with a lot of smaller sized companies, and they don't really have what I think is a built-in infrastructure to bring a new candidate on board. If you're going to bring someone on board who has no sales experience, you have to have a plan for that person. What are they going to be doing? Who are they going to be calling? Who are they going to be interacting with? What kind of training are you going to give them? Who's going to mentor them? You just can't hire them and turn them loose. So very few of my clients are interested, and I usually don't recommend it, although I am all for companies doing that.
Yes, sometimes I like to hire people that are new in that they don't have some of the bad habits that you might want to break. Mm-hmm. or the bad habits that you discover after they've been around for a while.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. So once you've hired someone, how do you figure out what type of help they might need beyond the general onboarding? This is what we're selling. This is who we are selling it to. How do you figure out the type of help and support that a salesperson needs?
Usually two areas are extremely helpful. The first area is the assessment. It may tell you that though they should be in sales, they struggle with overcoming objections, or they struggle on the close, or they struggle with prospecting. So you know that going in. And I ask a lot of questions around that in the interview process. If the assessment clearly shows they struggle in an area and they're unwilling to admit that even at all, I usually take a pass on that candidate. So this is typically someone who has said, yes, it's not my area of strength. I would like some coaching there. So you know that to begin with. And then you need to hear them on the phone. And you need to listen to their calls, and you need to listen to the calls together and provide coaching and corrective action. So it's usually two-pronged.
Yes, one of the things that we do when we're looking to hire someone that's going on the phone is we don't even look at resumes first. We ask people to respond to a voicemail. And the outgoing message says something like, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this position and how do we reach you? And the people that you want to hire, or potentially you might want to hire, are the ones that will hang up the phone, think about it, and call back and leave a coherent message. It is amazing what we hear sometimes.
It is. It's one of the reasons that I conduct the phone interview right off the bat, is that I need to hear how they sound on the phone, because so much of it is done on the phone or via a Zoom type of software.
So when you're interviewing someone on Zoom, I interviewed Julie Hansen a while ago, who trains on, she's a former actress, that she trains on how to sell through Zoom. And it's always kind of amazing because lots of people are like sitting in their bedroom in their pajamas talking to you on Zoom.
Yes.
And that would be a clue.
Do they know how to behave? Do they know how to dress? Have they set up a reasonable proximity of an office? Now, during the height of COVID, we all had to be flexible. I interviewed people with babies in their laps. I interviewed people who were in their kitchen. They had absolutely no idea they'd have to make some kind of a home office. So we all had to be flexible. But as time has gone on, if they are going to agree to the interview, do they conduct it in a reasonable, business-like manner?
Absolutely. So let's switch gears here for a moment, because part of being a sales manager or managing salespeople is having a plan, having goals, and a plan to get there. So I'm curious what you see as some of the do's for creating your plan and following it through to success, and also some of the don'ts. What are some of the mistakes that people make when they're trying to manage salespeople to this plan that they may or may not have? Take it away, Suzanne.
All right. So, Wendy, what each sales leader has to do is create minimum performance standards for each sales representative. So they are sure that each sales representative has a path to meet their goal, and that's able to roll up into the overall quota. I think there's some resistance now to setting goals, setting numbers. These people are adults. I'm not going to tell them how many conversations to have. And yet you still do, because they need some kind of a guidepost to let them know whether they're ahead or behind. So I think there's resistance to setting goals, and yet you still need to do that. How many calls are they making? How many conversations are they having with the end user? How many webinars are they conducting? They need a guidepost.
Yeah, and for the salesperson, it just helps them know how they're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so how do you coach your clients to manage their salespeople on a day-to-day basis?
I help them set these minimum performance standard goals, and then we integrate those into the CRM. And as much as they fight it, to my surprise, once we set the numbers and they start comparing the numbers against what the sales rep is actually doing, it's very eye-opening. And they say, wow, I had no idea they only spent X number of minutes on the phone every day. I had no idea they had so few end user conversations, while their webinars are really behind. And they really start to see how important it is to keep up with these minimum standards.
And so what I think I also hear you saying is the importance of having some kind of software to manage this process.
Yes. Yes, you need to automate the process so that it's not onerous and all the work doesn't fall to the sales leader or the company leader. It needs to be automated and clear, helpful if it's on a dashboard on the CRM.
Well, also it has to be something that the salesperson can actually implement. And if the team, if everyone is doing everything through Excel spreadsheets, that could take you the rest of your life.
It could take you the rest of your life. It's going to be inaccurate, and no one has the time. So you need to integrate it into the CRM system. Yes, I agree, Wendy, in a way that's easy for everybody to do this. But once we set the goals, another thing a lot of company leaders and sales leaders fear is not setting the exact right minimum performance standards. If it isn't right on the nose, and it doesn't have to be. It's great if you can be that accurate and can set the goals that accurately, fantastic. But you need a good, strong, solid guidepost that gets them ultimately to achieving their quota.
So is the fear that they'll set a goal that is too high and people won't be able to achieve it and they'll be demoralized, or they're afraid it's going to be too low and people will slack off?
Both. Let's say the goal is 50. I'm just using that as an example. Oh, if I set it at 45, what a disaster that'll be. Or maybe we should bring it down to 40. 50 is not enough. Let's put it at 60 when they've never set any goals at all before. And we talk for quite some time before we come up with that number 50. And I'll say, let's go with 50 and let's see how they perform against this number. And if we need to change the goals a little bit, if we go along, we will. So let's not be afraid to make a mistake. Let's not say, unless we have the perfect number, we can't hold people accountable to standards.
And so if a company is setting these kind of sales goals where they haven't in the past, do they find resistance from the sales team, and how do you manage that?
They, of course, find resistance. What the goals give them ultimately, though, is confidence. They are able now to have a conversation with the sales representative. Tell me about this week. Why couldn't you get to 50 calls? Why couldn't you have 20 conversations? What happened with your webinar number? And they're able to work backwards and forwards and start to hold the sales rep accountable. And this makes them more confident in leading the sales staff.
So we're going to pause now for a word from our sponsor, but when we come back, I want to ask you a little bit about how to do a sales audit, and just some of the general do's and don'ts, advice that you would give sales leaders for managing their teams the way you've been describing. But we are going to pause now for a word from our sponsor, the Salesology Vault. You know, just about every guest that I've interviewed on this podcast, Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders, has had a free gift for our listeners. So we've taken all of those gifts and we have put them all in one place just for you. We call it the Salesology Vault, and it's packed full of free gifts from sales leaders, sales experts, marketing gurus, revenue generation experts, sales management experts like our guest today. And we add another gift every single week. Every time we release a podcast, every Monday morning, we add a gift. So you can log in as often as you'd like and download as many gifts as you'd like. It's all free. You can go to bit.ly/gift vault. That's GIFTVAULT. Or easier, the link to the Salesology Vault's in the show notes. Go to the notes, click on the link, download your gifts. You'll be glad you did. And we are back with Suzanne Paling, who is the principal of Sales Management Services. So, Suzanne, I was reading on your website about doing a sales audit. What exactly is a sales audit? Why should companies do one? And how?
The sales audit involves me asking them questions about every aspect of sales. The very first question I ask them is, how is sales currently set up today? And we go from there. And I ask questions about the number of sales reps, how the accounts are assigned to them. Are there any, large account or small account specialists? Is it in person? Is it over the phone? Is it a combination? How much do they email versus speak to people? I just ask question after question after question. CRM usage, marketing integration, business to business data.
And once you've asked all those questions, then what?
What they usually find is that they're not really running sales. There's really no organization to it. As one CEO said to me, I hired grown-ups. I expect grown-ups to do their job. And what he realized is, while he may have hired grown-ups, they really weren't doing their job. And we needed to have an organization around these said grown-ups. So I think people, the more questions I ask, the more they come to their own conclusions.
Okay. I'm actually very curious about something because one of the things that I run into all the time, one of my pet peeves, and I'm actually on a mission to try and destroy this myth, but that's the myth of the born salesperson. So I wonder how many of your sales leaders, sales managers, business owners that are running a sales team tell you about how they've hired born salespeople, and they seem to think that that's going to do it.
When people typically say born salesperson, what they're referring to is someone who's really outgoing. And though a lot of studies have been done on salespeople, and we have all kinds of good data, and we know what a good salesperson does, there's no one sales personality. I always tell people my father was in sales and was one of the most reserved people you would ever meet. My mother was in sales and she didn't know a stranger. And they both sold successfully. There is no one sales personality. There are attributes. There are skill sets that make you successful. Money motivation, curiosity, the ability, the emotional intelligence to handle rejection, listening. So you look for these skills that a person has, not a personality. If they are super outgoing, maybe they're better off in customer service or in public relations, but there is no one sales personality.
Yeah, the myth of the born salesperson, if somebody might be born with a lot of talent. Think about how many talented athletes have never made it to the Olympics.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, can you share with us some general do's and don'ts about managing a sales team?
Sure. New sales managers, new sales leaders tend to hire and manage in their own image. Oh, this really motivated me. It will motivate them. This was where I struggled, so I will pay close attention to that. Make sure they don't struggle in this area. I was really good at that. I know they will be too. So they start molding it in their own image. And they need to make a special effort to get to know each salesperson individually and find out what motivates that salesperson. And sometimes, especially when they're new to the game, if a salesperson is motivated by something that didn't motivate them, they don't like that. Well, what do you mean that motivates you? No, this should motivate you. Well,